I wanted to talk about a discussion I just had with somebody who's walking into a new environment, somebody who is walking into the unknown, somebody who might have been dropped off in a situation and said, hey, go do chief things. And sometimes when someone thinks that, it could be difficult. You could feel like you have your back towards the wall. But not today. If you ever walk into a new environment, you're about to go be in charge of a environment or situation or a team. You know, the advice I always get asked is, hey, what's something I should be doing right away? Or what's something I should be thinking about before I make it to that team, before I make it to my next PCS motor pool? And some things you want to be thinking about, that way when you make boots on ground, is you want to start thinking about questions to ask when you get there. You want to be able to ask questions so you could learn. You want to be able to ask questions so you can adapt. You want to be able to ask questions so you could understand. And your first 2 weeks, I would say, we all try to do the first 2 weeks, but the first 2 weeks should be asking a question and processing all that. Well, what type of questions can you ask? Well, if you're walking into a new motor pool, you could ask the questions of like, hey, who updates the ESR? You know, what time do you update the ESR? What type of remarks do you put into the ESR? What remarks do you look for the ESR? This will help you gauge where they're at when it comes to, you know, the ESR level, the ESR understanding and reading. They might be doing an excellent job already and you might learn something, or you might be like, oh, well, let's look for these specific words like in-op, and let's make sure we don't use those words because we don't know what in-op really means. Another thing we talked about, I would say you want to make sure parts run. You know, a question you can ask, hey, who does parts run? What time is parts run? Are all the signature cards accurate at the SSA or ISD? You know, walk me through a day in the life of going to pick up parts, and ask that clerk, you know, that way you can start understanding. Winter meetings, that's always a big one. What's the battle rhythm for meetings? Who chairs, who sits in the room? That's something else you could go ahead and start thinking about and asking those questions. Roles and responsibility. This is a big one. Me and Mike talked about roles and responsibilities in an early episode, because who owns what? You don't want to walk and you don't want to create an environment where everyone walks in and it's the first person at the desk who updates the ESR, or it's the last person of the day who sends out the email. No, you don't want to have that type of system, because that's just reacting to chaos, and reacting to chaos is only going to develop burnout, and develop burnout, you are going to eventually get burnt out. So you want to be able to tie a responsibility to a name, tie ownership to that name. And once you tie ownership to that name, then you can start counting your wins. And when you start counting your wins for the day, it makes the day feel productive. And once you start feeling like a productive team, that's when you build cohesion. When you build cohesion, you build an environment where people want to be. So roles and responsibilities. Who's supposed to be doing what and when they're supposed to be doing it. Ownership. Have that. What's the commander's intent? Of course, that's always a gimme. When you get to a new environment or an organization, you always want to ask, hey, what's the commander's intent? What data or information does he or she like to see? How often do they get that information? And same thing with the first sergeant or sergeant major. Ask that first sergeant, sergeant major, hey, what is your intent for maintenance? How do you see maintenance operations? Build that relationship, build that lane or line of communication to help have that dialogue about maintenance. And that way you could help spot and see where education may be needed or reinforcement needs to be done to provide that pressure to ensure that the mission gets completed on time. And then who does what reports? Make sure you're tracking all the reports. And last one, you just want to make sure you go in there, take notes, take a lot of notes, start writing things down in front of somebody. I know a lot of us, or me, I'm a digital person. I use a lot of text on my phone as far as notes wise, and I have a computer I'm typing, but sometimes the old fashioned legal pad and a pencil goes a long way. Write notes, let them see you write notes, and then come back from a month or 60, 90 days and reread your notes and make sure you're doing a follow-up. It shows that you're walking around and you're actually caring and you're going to implement those things. Is it going to change? Does everything you write down in that notebook need to be completed and changed that same day? Absolutely not. It does not. However, going back and looking at it, and that way you could track your progress. You could see your long wins and you could see what you need to still change or you haven't to change. Because if you're in a spot for 3 months, on your first day, the problem you saw, if it's still there 3 months later, then is it still a problem? And even if you've been in your motor pool for a while, or if you've been in your seat or in the organization for some time, it's okay to still go out and ask the questions. Reinforce who's supposed to be doing what. You might be doing a self-evaluation on your own systems.